Before you settle in tonight, imagine trying to fall asleep to the sound of chains scraping against stone, the constant coughing of diseased prisoners, and the scurrying of countless rats across your body. Medieval jails assaulted every sense. The overwhelming stench of human waste and decay, the feeling of lice crawling across your skin, the taste of contaminated water, and the sight of fellow inmates slowly wasting away from jail fever. Tonight, we're exploring the sensory nightmare that was medieval imprisonment and how prisoners managed to maintain their sanity in these conditions. Congratulations, you've just been arrested for owing 3 shillings to the baker. That's roughly $15 in today's money. Welcome to medieval hospitality at its absolute finest, where your financial troubles have just become everyone else's entertainment. The guards are already dragging you through the cobblestone streets. And trust me, this isn't some discreet transfer to a hidden facility. You're about to become the star of the most humiliating show in town. Medieval authorities didn't believe in hiding their prisoners away in some remote location where decent people couldn't see them. That would defeat the entire purpose. Your new home sits right in the heart of the city, usually attached to the town hall, or positioned directly across from the marketplace. The same marketplace where you used to buy your bread before you couldn't afford it anymore. The irony is thick enough to cut with a rusty knife. You can literally see the baker's shop from your cell window. He's probably watching you right now, counting his coins and smiling. Here's the fun part nobody mentioned during your arrest. This isn't temporary holding while they sort things out. You're not getting a quick trial tomorrow morning so you can go home and pretend this never happened. Medieval justice moves slower than a 3-legged horse carrying a fat merchant. You could be staring at these stone walls for months, maybe years. They'll get around to deciding your fate when they feel like it, assuming they remember you exist at all. Your luxury suite comes with a premium location right next to all the action. The morning market opens just outside your barred window. You can hear the merchants calling out their wares, smell the fresh bread you can't afford, and watch the normal people living their normal lives while you rot in a cage like some exotic animal. The good news is you get a front row seat to everything happening in town. The bad news is everyone gets a front row seat to everything happening to you. Medieval architects designed these jails with visibility in mind. They wanted maximum exposure for minimum privacy. The thick stone walls weren't just built to keep you inside. They were built to project power, to show everyone walking by exactly what happened when you crossed the wrong people or couldn't pay your debts. These walls echo every sound you make. Your coughing, your crying, your desperate pleas for water. The acoustics turn your misery into a constant reminder for everyone within 100 yards. The iron bars aren't just functional. They're decorative elements in the town's daily theatre. People walk by and peer through them like you're some dangerous beast on display. Children press their faces against the cold metal and stare at you with wide eyes. Their parents pull them closer and whisper about what happens to people who don't follow the rules. You've become a living, breathing cautionary tale, complete with sound effects and smell-o-vision. Privacy is a luxury you left behind the moment those shackles clicked around your wrists. Every moment of your degradation happens in full view of anyone curious enough to look. When you relieve yourself in the corner bucket, someone's watching. When you break down crying because you realize your old life is over, someone's taking notes. When you try to sleep but can't, because the straw is full of things that bite, someone's probably placing bets on how long you'll last. The psychological impact hits harder than any physical punishment they could devise. You watch your former neighbors walk by without making eye contact. You see your old friends cross to the other side of the street to avoid looking at what you've become. The merchant you used to chat with every Tuesday now pretends you don't exist. Your social death happens in slow motion, one ignored plea for help at a time. The authorities plan this visibility down to the smallest detail. They position the jail windows at the perfect height for maximum viewing. Not too high that people can't see your face clearly, not too low that you might have some dignity left. They calculated the exact angle needed to turn your suffering into the most effective public service announcement possible. You're not just being punished. You're being used as an educational tool to keep everyone else in line. The stone itself tells a story. These aren't smooth, comfortable walls. They're rough, cold surfaces that scrape your skin when you lean against them. Every surface is designed to remind you that comfort is no longer part of your vocabulary. The dampness seeps through the stone and into your bones. The cold makes your joints ache in ways you never imagined possible. Winter is especially brutal when your only protection from the elements is whatever threadbare clothing you wore during your arrest. Your cell becomes a stage where the drama of medieval justice plays out for everyone's benefit. The morning crowd gets to see you looking pathetic and defeated. The afternoon shoppers can observe how prison life is treating you. The evening revelers stumble by and mock your misfortune for their own amusement. You're providing round-the-clock entertainment whether you want to or not. The authorities achieved exactly what they intended. Every person who walks by your cell receives a clear message about the consequences of stepping out of line. You're not just a prisoner. You're a walking advertisement for obedience, a living billboard that screams, "This could be you," to anyone thinking about challenging the system. Your misery serves a greater purpose in their grand design of social control. The most twisted part is how normal this becomes for everyone else. After a few weeks, you're just part of the scenery. People stop staring and start ignoring you completely, which somehow feels worse than the initial humiliation. You've gone from being a person to being furniture, a permanent fixture in their daily routine that they barely notice anymore. And speaking of barely noticing, wait until you meet the colourful characters you'll be sharing this nightmare with. You're not alone in your misery, but you might wish you were once you meet the colourful cast of characters sharing your space. Medieval jails operated on the brilliant principle of throwing everyone together and seeing what happened. Think of it as the world's worst dinner party, where nobody invited anyone and everyone wants to leave. Medieval authorities didn't believe in sorting prisoners by crime or danger level. That would require actual organization and forethought. Instead, they created one big unhappy family where debtors slept next to murderers, political prisoners shared water with horse thieves, and everyone pretended this was totally normal. The man snoring next to you might have killed 3 people in a tavern brawl, or he might have simply forgotten to pay his grain taxes. You won't know which until you ask. And trust me, you don't want to ask. Your sleeping arrangement resembles a medieval game of Russian roulette. The knight in the corner with the fancy clothes and dead eyes. He strangled his wife's lover with his bare hands. The merchant by the window counting invisible coins on his fingers. He couldn't afford his guild fees and lost everything. The woman muttering prayers in the far corner. She was caught stealing bread for her starving children. The young man who keeps staring at the walls. Nobody knows what he did, and he's not talking. Here's where medieval prison logic gets truly absurd. Social class still mattered, even in this pit of despair. Wealthy prisoners could buy better sleeping spots, cleaner straw, and actual blankets. They negotiated with guards for premium locations near the windows, where fresh air occasionally wandered in. Meanwhile, you're stuck in the dampest corner, next to the overflowing waste bucket, because your 3 shillings debt doesn't buy you much social standing among the criminal elite. The wealthy prisoners formed their own exclusive club within the jail. They shared better food, traded favors with corrupt guards, and looked down on the common criminals like you. A lord imprisoned for political treason still expected peasants to show him respect. A rich merchant facing fraud charges still demanded the best spot by the fire. The class system followed everyone through the jail doors and set up permanent residence. Strange friendships developed in this twisted environment. The murderer became protective of the debt-ridden baker because they both hated the same corrupt tax collector. The horse thief taught the political prisoner how to pick locks in exchange for reading lessons. The woman who poisoned her husband shared her hidden food with the man who couldn't pay his rent. Desperation created bonds that would never exist in the outside world. Your fellow inmates fell into different categories of helpful and dangerous, often changing without warning. The old man who seemed harmless during the day turned violent when the sun went down. The woman who shared her bread with everyone was secretly planning to slit the throat of the guard who arrested her. The teenager who cried constantly was actually the most dangerous person in the cell, according to whispered rumors about what he did to his entire family. Overcrowding turned every basic human function into a group activity. You shared sleeping space with strangers who kicked, snored, and talked in their sleep about their crimes. The single chamber pot served everyone, creating a schedule more complex than royal court ceremonies. Personal space became a fantasy from your previous life. Privacy disappeared completely. Everything you did happened in full view of people you wouldn't trust with a copper coin. The psychological strain of living with unpredictable people in an unpredictable situation wore down everyone's nerves. You never knew if your neighbor was planning an escape, plotting revenge against another prisoner, or slowly losing their mind from the constant stress. The merchant who seemed friendly might be planning to kill you for your shoes. The knight who ignored everyone might be your best protection against the others. Reading people became a survival skill you never knew you needed. Trust became the most dangerous luxury in your new world. The prisoner who offered to share information about guard schedules might be setting you up for punishment. The woman who promised to help you escape might be working with the authorities to identify potential troublemakers. The man who claimed he was innocent just like you might be planning to use you as a human shield during his next violent outburst. Sleep became impossible with so many unknown variables surrounding you. Every sound could mean danger. Every movement might signal trouble. The person next to you might be having a nightmare or planning something terrible. You learned to sleep with one eye open, which meant you never really slept at all. Exhaustion became another enemy in a place already full of threats. The jail's social hierarchy operated on rules nobody explained, but everyone understood. The most violent prisoners held the highest positions. The longest-serving inmates commanded respect through experience. The wealthiest bought their way into leadership roles. Everyone else scrambled for whatever scraps of dignity and safety remained available. Survival meant learning to navigate these complex relationships without making fatal mistakes. You discovered which prisoners to avoid, which ones might help you, and which ones changed their minds based on their mood. You figured out how to stay invisible when tensions ran high, and when to speak up to maintain your place in the group. You mastered the art of appearing strong enough to avoid bullying, but not strong enough to threaten the established order. The unspoken alliances that governed daily life shifted constantly based on new arrivals, deaths, releases, and changing circumstances. Today's protector might become tomorrow's enemy if someone offered them a better deal. The person you trusted with your life might betray you for an extra piece of bread or a rumor about early release. This twisted community became your entire world, with its own rules, relationships, and survival strategies. You learn to read the mood of the group, anticipate conflicts, and position yourself for the best possible outcome in any situation. The skills you developed had nothing to do with justice or rehabilitation, and everything to do with staying alive in an environment designed to break you. Speaking of staying alive, your stomach is about to remind you that survival requires more than just avoiding dangerous cellmates. Hope you're not too attached to regular meals or food that's technically edible, because medieval jail cuisine is about to redefine your relationship with hunger. Your stomach is already growling from the stress of your situation, but it's about to learn what real emptiness feels like. The good news is you won't have to worry about overeating. The bad news is you might not have to worry about eating at all. Here's the first shock to your system. Nobody's bringing you 3 square meals a day out of the goodness of their hearts. Medieval prisoners had to pay for their own food, assuming they had money left after paying the arrest fees, the cell fees, and the shackle rental fees. Yes, they charged you for the privilege of wearing chains. If you thought owing 3 shillings was your only financial problem, you're about to discover a whole new level of creative taxation. The jailers operated the most successful captive audience business model in history. They had customers who literally couldn't go anywhere else, couldn't negotiate prices, and couldn't choose not to buy the product. You're trapped with vendors who know exactly how desperate you are and price their goods accordingly. A piece of bread that costs 1 penny in the market outside your window costs 5 pennies when it passes through those iron bars. If you're expecting charity to save you, prepare for disappointment. The church might send someone around once a week with leftover communion bread, but that has to feed every prisoner in the building. Your fellow inmates aren't interested in sharing what little they manage to obtain. The wealthy prisoners who can afford decent food aren't looking to sponsor your dining experience out of the kindness of their hearts. The cruel irony hits you like a mace to the gut. You could starve to death in jail even if you're completely innocent, simply because you can't afford the inflated prices for survival. Your crime was owing money you didn't have. Your punishment is needing money you definitely don't have. The system creates a perfect circle of financial impossibility that traps you between owing debt and accumulating more debt just to stay alive. What passes for prison food would make a peasant's worst meal look like a royal feast. The bread arrives green with mold and hard enough to crack teeth. The guards tell you the mold adds flavor and extra nutrition. You're not sure if they're joking or if that's actually what they believe. Either way, you learn to scrape off the worst parts and choke down what remains. The daily gruel consists mainly of water, with occasional visits from barley or oats that died of natural causes weeks ago. Sometimes you find mysterious chunks floating in the watery mess. You stop asking what they are because the answers are never reassuring. The meat, when it appears, carries a smell that suggests it was walking around when your grandfather was young. The texture resembles leather that's been chewed by several generations of goats. Your fellow prisoners who manage to maintain their wealth eat actual meals while you gnaw on crusts that move when you're not looking. They receive roasted chicken, fresh bread, and wine that doesn't taste like it was filtered through dirty socks. They eat these meals directly in front of you, making sure you can smell every delicious bite. The psychological torture of watching others eat real food while your stomach cramps with emptiness becomes its own special form of punishment. Hunger affects your brain in ways you never expected. Your ability to think clearly disappears first. Making simple decisions becomes exhausting. Planning an escape requires mental energy you no longer possess. Hope requires calories you don't have. Your mind focuses entirely on food, making every other thought secondary to the overwhelming need to find something edible. The smells from the marketplace outside torture you more effectively than any physical punishment device. Fresh bread baking in the morning, roasted meat cooking over open fires, sweet pastries cooling in shop windows. The wind carries these scents directly through your cell window, reminding you constantly of what you can't have. Your mouth waters over phantom meals while your stomach digests itself. Some prisoners resort to eating things that weren't originally intended as food. Leather straps become emergency snacks when prepared properly. The straw bedding provides roughage if you can ignore the things living in it. Desperate hunger makes you consider options that would have horrified your former self. You understand why the older prisoners look at the rats with calculating expressions. The begging begins after your pride finishes starving to death. You press your face against the bars and call out to anyone passing by. You promise to repay money you don't have for food you desperately need. Most people ignore you completely. Others stop to mock your situation before moving on with their well-fed lives. Occasionally, someone throws you scraps they wouldn't feed to their pigs. Trading becomes your new career once you run out of money completely. Your shoes might buy you bread for 3 days if they're still in decent condition. Your belt could purchase a week's worth of questionable meat. Your extra clothes become currency in an economy where starvation is the only alternative to commerce. You learn to negotiate with people who hold all the power, while you hold nothing but desperation. The constant hunger becomes a companion that never leaves your side. It wakes you up at night with stomach cramps. It makes you dizzy when you try to stand. It turns every conversation with other prisoners into discussions about food, memories of past meals, and fantasies about future feasts. You dream about eating and wake up disappointed to discover you're still empty. Some prisoners survive by forming alliances based entirely on food sharing. They pool their resources to buy larger portions that can be divided among the group. Others become informants for the guards in exchange for kitchen scraps. Everyone develops their own strategy for avoiding starvation, and none of those strategies involve maintaining dignity or moral standards. Your relationship with food transforms completely during this experience. Every crumb becomes precious. Every drop of water gets savored. You learn to make a single piece of bread last an entire day by eating it one tiny piece at a time. You discover muscles in your jaw you never knew existed from chewing impossibly hard food until it becomes swallowable. The psychological impact of chronic hunger extends far beyond physical discomfort. But speaking of discomfort, your nose is about to experience assault from directions you never imagined possible. Take a deep breath. Actually, don't, because the smell of medieval jail is about to become your new reality for the foreseeable future. Your nose is about to experience an assault that will redefine your understanding of what the human body can endure. The stench hits you like a physical wall the moment you cross the threshold, and there's nowhere to run from it. The overwhelming assault on your nose comes from every direction at once. Human waste dominates the bouquet, creating a bass note that never fades. Dozens of unwashed bodies contribute their own special blend of sweat, fear, and desperation. Rotting food adds sweet undertones of decay that make your stomach turn. And somewhere beneath it all lurks the unmistakable smell of death itself, seeping from corners where previous occupants didn't make it out alive. Here's the horrifying realization that breaks most people faster than physical torture. There's no escape from the stench. It soaks into your clothes within hours. It penetrates your hair and skin like invisible oil. It settles into your lungs with every breath you take. Eventually, it becomes part of you, marking your soul with the signature scent of despair. You'll carry this smell long after you leave this place, assuming you ever do. The specific sources of this olfactory nightmare tell the story of medieval prison management. The latrine overflows constantly because nobody maintains it properly. Human waste pools in corners where desperate prisoners relieved themselves when they couldn't reach the communal bucket. Vomit from sick prisoners creates acidic puddles that never fully dry. The sweet sick odor of infected wounds mingles with everything else, creating combinations that shouldn't exist in nature. Medieval architects designed these jails without considering ventilation, because prisoner comfort wasn't part of the plan. The lack of airflow traps every odor inside the stone walls, creating a suffocating atmosphere of concentrated decay. Fresh air becomes a luxury reserved for the guards who can leave at the end of their shifts. You're stuck breathing recycled misery 24 hours a day. Your nose attempts to protect you by shutting down after the first few days. The constant bombardment of terrible smells overwhelms your ability to distinguish between different types of awful. But somehow, the stench still penetrates your consciousness. Your brain continues processing the horror even when your nose stops working properly. The psychological impact grows stronger as your physical defenses fail. The stench becomes a form of psychological torture, more effective than any physical punishment device they could invent. Every breath reminds you how far you've fallen from human dignity. The smell strips away your sense of self-worth more efficiently than beatings or starvation. You start to believe you deserve this treatment. Because you smell like you belong here, the despair deepens when you realize this smell will cling to you, even if you ever get out. Former prisoners carry the scent like a permanent tattoo that marks them as criminals forever. People cross the street to avoid walking near someone who smells like jail. Potential employers refuse to hire anyone carrying that distinctive odor. The smell becomes a life sentence that continues long after your legal punishment ends. Your fellow prisoners develop various coping strategies that demonstrate human adaptability at its most desperate. Some stuff rags in their noses, creating makeshift filters that barely reduce the intensity. Others try breathing exclusively through their mouths, which only transfers the assault from smell to taste. A few attempt to create pleasant scents by hoarding flower petals or herbs, but these efforts get overwhelmed within hours. The psychological warfare continues as you realize you're contributing to the problem. Your own body begins producing new and creative odors as hygiene becomes impossible. You haven't bathed in weeks. Your clothes haven't been washed since your arrest. Your breath could knock down a healthy horse. You're simultaneously victim and perpetrator of this olfactory assault, trapped in a cycle of mutual contamination. Different areas of the jail specialize in their own unique fragrances. The corner where prisoners dump their food scraps creates a fermenting mixture that bubbles and hisses. The sleeping area smells like unwashed humanity, concentrated into its purest form. The area near the single window carries hints of fresh air that only make the contrast more unbearable. The guards who work here develop their own relationship with the smell. Some cover their faces with cloth soaked in vinegar or herbs. Others seem immune to the stench, suggesting either incredible adaptation or complete loss of their sense of smell. They joke about how the prisoners smell, as if they're not breathing the same contaminated air for hours every day. Your clothes become weapons of olfactory destruction. The fabric absorbs every smell it encounters and holds onto those scents with impressive determination. Your shirt becomes a catalogue of prison odors, telling the story of your incarceration through smell alone. Washing isn't an option, so the accumulation continues daily. Sleep becomes difficult when every breath brings fresh reminders of your situation. You try holding your breath, but that only works for so long. You attempt sleeping with your face pressed against the wall, hoping stone might smell better than air. You experiment with different positions that might provide relief, but the stench is omnipresent and patient. The smell affects your appetite in ways that compound your starvation problem. Food becomes even less appetizing when it's seasoned with the ambient odors of human misery. Your brain associates eating with breathing deeply, which brings larger doses of the terrible smell. Hunger battles discussed in a contest nobody wins. Some prisoners claim they eventually stop noticing the smell, but you suspect they're lying to themselves for psychological survival. The human nose might adapt to consistent odors, but this isn't consistent. It's constantly changing as new sources of stench appear, and old ones evolve into different types of awful. The temperature affects how the smells behave. Hot days make everything worse by accelerating decomposition and intensifying every odor. Cold days provide slight relief by slowing down the worst chemical processes. Rain brings humidity that seems to activate dormant smells hiding in the walls and floors. Your sense of smell will never fully recover from this experience. But speaking of things that won't recover, wait until you meet the tiny creatures that call this putrid environment home alongside you. Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of a menagerie you never wanted. Welcome to your new ecosystem of lice, rats, bedbugs, fleas, and countless other creatures that find you absolutely delicious. Your body has become a walking buffet for every parasite within a 50-mile radius. The good news is you'll never be lonely again. The bad news is your new companions are literally eating you alive. Medieval jails operated as perfect breeding grounds for every type of vermin known to mankind. These stone buildings teemed with creatures that saw prisoners as an all-you-can-eat buffet that never closed. The overcrowded conditions, lack of sanitation, and absence of any pest control created paradise for parasites. You're not just sharing space with other prisoners anymore. You're sharing your actual body with armies of tiny invaders who consider you their permanent home. Here's the horrifying discovery that breaks most prisoners faster than starvation or beatings. These creatures aren't just annoying house guests. They're disease carriers that could kill you faster than anything else in this nightmare. Every bite potentially delivers typhus, plague, or dozens of other infections that medieval medicine couldn't treat, even if they wanted to help you. Your adorable new pets are basically tiny assassins with 6 legs and an appetite for human blood. The intimate horror begins with lice crawling through your hair like they own the place. They set up permanent residence in your scalp and multiply faster than rabbits in springtime. You feel them moving constantly, tickling your neck and ears as they search for the best feeding spots. They lay eggs in your hair that hatch into more lice, creating a self-sustaining population that considers your head their ancestral homeland. Bedbugs join the party by feasting on your blood while you try to sleep. These flat brown creatures hide in the straw during the day and emerge at night for their liquid dinner. They inject you with numbing agents so you don't feel the initial bite, then feast for 10 or 15 minutes before retreating to digest their meal. You wake up covered in red, itchy welts that burn and itch for days. The rats deserve special mention because they're bold enough to nibble your toes while you sleep. These aren't shy creatures hiding in corners. Medieval jail rats grew fat and confident from generations of easy meals. They chew holes in your clothing to access the skin underneath. They steal food directly from your hands. Some grow large enough to look you in the eye and dare you to do something about their behavior. The infestations spread rapidly through the overcrowded conditions, making everyone equally miserable within days. One prisoner brings in fleas, another contributes lice, and soon the entire jail population shares the same collection of parasites. The creatures jump from person to person, creating a communal infestation that no individual can escape. You become part of a living ecosystem where humans serve as the primary food source. Your psychological breakdown accelerates as you realize you'll never be clean again. The constant itching drives you toward madness faster than solitary confinement. You scratch until you bleed, creating open wounds that attract more parasites and increase your risk of infection. You feel invaded by tiny predators that you can't see, can't catch, and can't kill. Sleep becomes impossible when your skin crawls with movement you can feel but can't stop. The feeling of being constantly invaded affects your sense of self in ways you never anticipated. Your body no longer belongs to you alone. Hundreds of creatures call your flesh home, reproducing and feeding without your permission. You lose the fundamental human right to control what happens to your own skin. The psychological impact rivals any torture device medieval authorities could invent. Prisoners develop strange relationships with the rats because they're the only creatures large enough to interact with directly. Some prisoners befriend individual rats, sharing scraps of food and giving them names like old companions. Others view the rats as emergency food sources for times when starvation becomes unbearable. The line between pet and meal shifts based on how hungry you become. The rats display personalities that make these relationships more complex than simple pest control. Some rats become protective of certain prisoners, chasing away other rats or warning about approaching guards. Others turn aggressive, stealing food and biting anyone who interferes with their territory. You learn to read rat behavior like a survival skill, understanding which ones might help you and which ones plan to eat you. Trying to sleep while things crawl across your body becomes an exercise in psychological endurance. Every sensation might be a parasite looking for a new feeding spot. Every tickle could be a rat exploring your clothing for hidden food. Every itch might signal a new infestation taking hold. You develop hyper-awareness of every sensation on your skin, making rest impossible even when exhaustion overwhelms you. The creatures nest in your clothing, turning your garments into mobile habitats for expanding populations. Your shirt becomes an apartment complex for lice families. Your pants house communities of fleas that use the fabric as launching pads for feeding expeditions. Your shoes provide cozy homes for various insects that emerge at night to explore your feet. The desperation reaches peak levels when you realize these creatures are better fed than you are. They feast on your blood while you starve from lack of food. They reproduce successfully while you waste away from malnutrition. They thrive in conditions that are slowly killing you. The irony cuts deeper than any physical wound. Experienced prisoners learn to coexist with their tiny tormentors because fighting them requires energy better spent on survival. They name particularly persistent rats, track the behavioral patterns of their personal lice colonies, and develop schedules around feeding times for their bedbugs. They create hierarchies among the vermin, respecting the rats that leave them alone and plotting revenge against the bedbugs that bite too aggressively. The veteran prisoners share wisdom about managing your new ecosystem. They teach you which rats can be trusted, how to minimize lice reproduction, and where bedbugs like to hide during daylight hours. They explain the social structure of jail vermin and how to position yourself within it for maximum survival advantage. But these creatures serve another purpose beyond simple torment. They're the primary delivery system for the diseases that will soon join your expanding collection of medieval nightmares. That cough echoing through the cells isn't just annoying. It's the sound of jail fever making its rounds, and you're next on the guest list. The wet, hacking sound bounces off stone walls and settles into your bones like a death sentence you can hear coming. Medieval prisons operated as disease incubators, where typhus, dysentery, and plague spread faster than gossip in a small village. Your adorable collection of lice and rats wasn't just there for companionship. They were the delivery system for illnesses that killed more prisoners than starvation, violence, and despair combined. Here's the cruel irony that makes medieval justice even more twisted than you thought. You could die from disease before your trial ever happened, making your guilt or innocence completely irrelevant. The authorities didn't care if you were innocent of your original crime, because the real crime was being poor enough to end up in jail in the first place. Death by disease became the ultimate punishment for the unforgivable sin of not having enough money to stay out of their stone cages. Jail fever earned its name for good reason. This typhus strain spread through body lice that treated prisoners like an all-you-can-eat buffet with legs. The lice that were already making your scalp their permanent residence carried bacteria that entered your bloodstream through their bites. Within days of infection, you developed high fevers that could reach dangerous temperatures. Your body burned from the inside while chills racked your frame. Delirium followed as your brain cooked in its own heat. The fever brought hallucinations that blurred the line between nightmare and reality. You saw dead prisoners walking around your cell, having conversations with rats, and planning escapes through walls that weren't there. Your fellow inmates couldn't tell if you were talking to them or to the voices in your head. The delirium made you dangerous to yourself and others as you acted on delusions that seemed perfectly logical to your overheated brain. Overcrowding and poor sanitation created perfect conditions for epidemic outbreaks that swept through jails like wildfire. Dozens of people crammed into spaces designed for half that number shared everything, including their diseases. The single waste bucket became a breeding ground for bacteria that contaminated the air everyone breathed. Sick prisoners couldn't isolate themselves because there was nowhere to go. Healthy prisoners couldn't avoid contact because there was nowhere to hide. The paranoia of watching fellow prisoners develop symptoms created its own form of psychological torture. You studied every cough, every shiver, and every moment of confusion from your cellmates. That merchant who seemed fine yesterday now sweats through his fever dreams. The woman who shared her bread last week now vomits blood into the corner. You know you're next, but there's nowhere to run and no way to protect yourself from the invisible killers floating through the stagnant air. Disease became another weapon of social control that authorities wielded against the poor and powerless. The threat of infection kept visitors away from jails, isolating prisoners from any outside support or witness to their suffering. Families stopped bringing food and comfort to infected relatives. Friends abandoned imprisoned loved ones rather than risk catching jail fever themselves. The diseases turned prisons into quarantine zones that nobody wanted to enter or acknowledge. Your own body's betrayal felt worse than anything the authorities could do to you directly. You woke up one morning with a headache that felt like someone driving nails into your skull. By afternoon, your skin burned with fever, while your muscles ached like you'd been beaten with clubs. Your stomach cramped and twisted as dysentery joined the party, adding digestive agony to your expanding collection of symptoms. The psychological terror of feeling your mind slip away piece by piece broke prisoners faster than physical torture. You struggled to remember your own name while hallucinations convinced you that escape was possible through solid stone walls. You had conversations with people who weren't there and forgot about people who were. Your personality dissolved as the fever rewrote your brain's basic functions. Medical treatment in medieval jails consisted mainly of prayer and hope, neither of which proved particularly effective against bacterial infections. The authorities didn't provide doctors because dead prisoners cost less money than living ones. Guards avoided sick prisoners to protect themselves, leaving the infected to survive or die based on pure chance. Nobody understood how diseases spread, so prevention was impossible even for prisoners who could afford better conditions. Some prisoners survived jail fever through sheer luck and strong immune systems. Others died within days of developing symptoms, their bodies unable to fight infections that modern antibiotics could cure in a week. The randomness of who lived and who died added another layer of psychological torture to an already impossible situation. Survival had nothing to do with guilt, innocence, or moral character. The bodies of dead prisoners piled up faster than authorities could remove them, especially during epidemic outbreaks. Corpses decomposed in cells with living prisoners for days or weeks before anyone bothered to haul them away. The smell of death mixed with the existing prison odors to create new levels of olfactory nightmare. You learned to sleep next to rotting bodies because there was no alternative. Watching friends die from preventable diseases while you remained healthy created survivor's guilt that lasted longer than the physical symptoms. You wondered why you lived while better people died. You questioned whether your survival meant you deserved to be there more than the innocent victims who succumbed to jail fever. The randomness of disease made justice seem even more meaningless than it already was. The threat of epidemic kept medieval jails in a constant state of crisis that authorities used to justify even worse treatment. They blamed prisoners for spreading disease while ignoring the conditions that made outbreaks inevitable. The cycle of infection and death continued year after year because nobody with power cared enough to change the system that created these biological weapons. Your immune system, weakened by starvation and stress, fought a losing battle against multiple infections attacking simultaneously. But if disease didn't kill you, there was always public humiliation waiting to finish what jail fever started. Thought your suffering was private? Think again. It's time for your starring role in the medieval equivalent of reality TV, complete with rotten vegetables and an audience that's been waiting all week for this show. The guards are dragging you from your cell toward the town square, and you can already hear the excited chatter of people gathering for the entertainment. Your legs shake as you realize what's about to happen. The pillory and stocks await you like wooden monsters designed specifically to destroy whatever dignity you had left. The pillory and stocks represented the ultimate public humiliation devices, engineered by minds that understood exactly how to break a human spirit. These weren't just punishment tools. They were theatrical stages where your community came to watch you transform from person to object lesson. The wooden contraptions locked your head and hands in place, turning you into a living statue that couldn't move, couldn't defend itself, and couldn't escape the judgment of everyone you'd ever known. The psychological horror begins the moment they lock the wooden boards around your neck and wrists. Your neighbors start gathering in the square, pointing at you and whispering to their children about what happens to people who break the rules. These are people who used to greet you at church, buy goods from your shop, and invite you to community celebrations. Now they're here to watch your public destruction like it's the most exciting event of their month. Your former friends arrive with baskets full of rotten vegetables spoiled eggs, and garbage they've been saving specifically for this moment. The baker whose debt landed you in jail shows up with moldy bread. The tax collector who arrested you brings his whole family to watch the show. Your own neighbors carry stones and mud, eager to participate in your humiliation. The crowd grows larger as word spreads that the entertainment is about to begin. The first projectile hits your face before you're mentally prepared for what's coming. A rotten apple explodes against your cheek, sending putrid juice into your eyes and mouth. You can't wipe it away because your hands are locked in the wooden restraints. You can't duck or dodge because your head is trapped in place. You can only stand there and accept whatever the crowd decides to throw at you. The physical torture escalates as people discover how helpless you are. Someone spits directly into your face. Others throw handfuls of mud that stick to your hair and clothing. Children dare each other to get closer and pelt you with stones. The adults encourage this behavior because it teaches valuable lessons about respecting authority and following rules. Your pain becomes their children's education. Public punishment served dual purposes that medieval authorities understood perfectly. Individual torture broke the specific person being punished, but the public display warned everyone else about the consequences of stepping out of line. Every person watching your humiliation received a clear message about what happened to rule breakers. Your suffering prevented dozens of other people from making similar mistakes. Your reputation crumbles in real time as each thrown vegetable destroys another piece of your future prospects. The merchant who might have hired you after your release watches you get pelted with garbage and decides you're not the kind of person he wants working for him. The woman who might have married you sees you covered in filth and realizes she needs to find someone else. Every relationship you ever built dissolves under the weight of public shame. The stocks became community theater, where crowd psychology transformed ordinary people into bloodthirsty mobs. The mood shifted without warning from playful mockery to genuine violence. Someone threw a stone that opened a cut on your forehead. Blood ran into your eyes, but you couldn't wipe it away. The crowd cheered at the sight of blood, encouraging others to throw harder projectiles. The helplessness reached levels that broke something fundamental inside your mind. You couldn't defend yourself when someone kicked dirt into your face. You couldn't dodge when teenagers threw sharp stones at your head. You couldn't even wipe your own nose when it started bleeding from the constant assault. The basic human ability to protect yourself vanished completely, leaving you as vulnerable as a newborn baby. Hours passed while the entertainment continued around you. Your legs cramped from standing in one position, but the wooden restraints prevented you from shifting your weight. Your neck ached from supporting your head at an unnatural angle. Your wrists bled where the wood rubbed against your skin. The crowd thinned and thickened throughout the day as people finished their errands and stopped by to contribute to your misery. The psychological damage went deeper than any physical wound they could inflict. You watched people you trusted reveal their true nature as they participated in your destruction. The kindly old woman who used to bring you soup when you were sick threw rotten eggs at your face. The young man you helped when his cart broke down laughed as you bled from stone cuts. Every relationship you thought was real proved to be conditional on your social status. Some people in the crowd showed mercy by simply watching without participating in the violence. Others demonstrated creativity by bringing especially disgusting projectiles they'd prepared specifically for your punishment. The butcher arrived with spoiled meat that had been rotting for weeks. The tanner brought scraps of hide soaked in urine. Your tormentors competed to see who could cause the most humiliation. The social death felt more permanent than any physical injury. Even if your body healed from the cuts and bruises, your reputation would never recover from this public display. Everyone in town would remember seeing you locked in the stocks, covered in garbage, bleeding from stone wounds. The image would follow you for the rest of your life, marking you as someone who couldn't be trusted with responsibility or respect. Night finally arrived, and the crowd dispersed to their comfortable homes. The guards unlocked the wooden restraints and let you collapse to the ground. Your legs couldn't support your weight after hours of standing motionless. Your hands shook uncontrollably from the stress and physical trauma. But somehow, your mind was already working on schemes that other desperate prisoners had whispered about during those long nights in your cell. Desperate times call for creative measures, and medieval prisoners developed some surprisingly ingenious ways to say goodbye to their stone accommodations. After weeks of watching fellow inmates die from disease, starvation, and despair, the human spirit started calculating odds and planning impossibilities. Your mind, sharpened by constant danger and dulled by malnutrition, began seeing opportunities where others saw only walls. The cat and mouse game between prisoners plotting freedom and jailers trying to keep them contained became the most dangerous entertainment available in your new world. The stakes couldn't be higher for anyone brave enough or desperate enough to attempt an escape. Success meant returning to your old life, assuming anyone still remembered you existed. Freedom meant sleeping in your own bed, eating real food, and breathing air that didn't smell like concentrated human misery. But failure often meant death, either from the attempt itself or from the creative punishments authorities imposed on captured escapees. Some failed prisoners found themselves in conditions that made regular jail look like luxury accommodations. Bribing guards represented the safest escape method for prisoners who still possessed valuable items or connections. The corruption flowed both ways in medieval jails, with guards supplementing their meager wages by accepting payments for special favors. A silver ring might buy you an unlocked door during the night shift. A gold coin could purchase a guard's temporary blindness while you slipped away. The wealthy prisoners who maintained their resources from outside often disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind only rumors about generous payments to cooperative officials. Lock-picking required skills that most prisoners didn't possess, but the desperate learned quickly from those who did. The old thief in the corner with missing fingers taught interested students the basics of manipulating simple medieval locks. He used bent nails, pieces of wire, and strips of metal torn from broken shackles. The lessons happened during the loudest moments when other prisoners covered the sound of practice sessions. Students paid for instruction with food, promises of future favors, or portions of their own escape plans. Tunnel digging appealed to prisoners with time, determination, and access to digging tools. The stone floors posed serious challenges, but some jails had areas where prisoners could reach softer earth beneath the foundations. These operations required months of secret work, usually involving multiple prisoners taking shifts. They hid the excavated dirt in their clothing and scattered it around the cell during daily activities. The lucky few who reached the outside often found their tunnels collapsed or discovered by guards before they could use them. Disguising as visitors or workers represented the most audacious escape attempts. Prisoners who maintained contact with outside allies arranged for clothing switches during visits. A family member would arrive wearing extra garments and leave with fewer items than they brought. The escaping prisoner walked out dressed as a merchant, servant, or even a guard if they possessed the right connections and costume pieces. These attempts required perfect timing, cooperative accomplices, and incredible nerve. Planning an escape while maintaining the pretense of resigned acceptance required acting skills that most prisoners developed naturally. you learn to appear defeated while secretly memorizing guard schedules and studying weak points in the building's construction. During the day, you slumped in corners and avoided eye contact. At night, you tested loose stones and examined lock mechanisms. The psychological tension of maintaining this double life added another layer of stress to an already unbearable situation. Successful escapes became legendary stories that spread through prison populations like wildfire. Prisoners whispered about the merchant who bribed 3 guards and walked out during a shift change. They shared details about the knight who picked his locks and climbed out through a window. These tales grew in the telling, gaining impossible elements and heroic details. The stories served as inspiration for other prisoners and proof that freedom remained possible for those brave enough to seize it. The desperation that drove prisoners to attempt seemingly impossible escapes often overwhelmed rational thinking. Men who had never committed violence planned to overpower armed guards. Women who had never left their home villages plotted cross-country journeys without resources or connections. The psychological pressure of imprisonment convinced people they could accomplish feats that would challenge healthy, well-fed individuals with proper equipment and planning. Some prisoners spent months preparing elaborate escape plans that fell apart within minutes of execution. They studied guard rotations for weeks, only to discover that schedules changed unpredictably. They saved food for journey provisions that spoiled before they could use it. They recruited fellow prisoners who betrayed them to guards in exchange for better treatment. The gap between planning and execution destroyed more escape attempts than poor preparation or bad luck. The few prisoners who successfully escaped often faced new challenges that made their victory temporary. Medieval society offered limited places where fugitives could hide safely. Most escapees lacked resources for long-distance travel or establishing new identities. Many found themselves recaptured within days or weeks, returned to face punishments that made their original sentences look merciful. The authorities made examples of failed escapees to discourage other prisoners from attempting similar schemes. Failed escape attempts resulted in punishments designed to break the spirit of anyone considering similar actions. Captured prisoners faced extended sentences, transfer to worse facilities, or physical punishments that left permanent reminders of their failed bid for freedom. Some found themselves chained to walls or floors, eliminating any possibility of future escape attempts. The authorities understood that crushing hope was more effective than any physical torture they could devise. The knowledge that escape was theoretically possible kept some prisoners sane during their darkest moments. Even if their own attempts failed or never progressed beyond planning stages, the dream of freedom provided psychological relief from the daily reality of imprisonment. The stories of successful escapes, whether true or embellished, reminded everyone that the walls were not absolutely impenetrable. This hope became both blessing and curse, offering comfort while preventing acceptance of their situation. Most escape attempts failed because medieval prisons were designed by people who understood human desperation and planned accordingly. But the few successes kept the dream alive for everyone, proving that determination and luck could occasionally triumph over stone walls and iron bars. Whether these dreams sustained prisoners or drove them deeper into madness depended entirely on how long their minds could handle the constant tension between hope and reality. The stone walls don't just imprison your body. They slowly chip away at your sanity until you're not sure who you were before this nightmare began. Your mind becomes another casualty of medieval justice, breaking down piece by piece while your physical body somehow keeps breathing. The psychological toll hits harder than starvation, disease, or public humiliation, because it attacks the very core of who you are as a person. Medieval imprisonment created perfect conditions for mental breakdown through a combination of factors that modern psychology would recognize as systematic torture. The isolation from normal human contact, combined with constant fear and uncertainty about your future, created stress levels that few minds could handle indefinitely. The complete loss of control over basic functions like eating, sleeping, and personal hygiene stripped away fundamental human dignity that most people never realized they needed. Here's the terrifying realization that creeps up slowly over weeks or months. You're changing in ways you can't control, becoming someone you don't recognize when you catch glimpses of your reflection in puddles of dirty water. The person who entered this jail with hopes of eventual freedom starts dissolving. Someone else takes their place, someone harder and more desperate who thinks thoughts the old you would have found horrifying. The specific mental breaking points varied between prisoners, but certain patterns emerged consistently. Losing track of time happened first as days blended into an endless cycle of misery without meaningful markers. You stopped counting weeks because the numbers became meaningless. Talking to rats seemed perfectly reasonable when human conversation disappeared from your daily routine. The rats listened better than most people anyway, and they never judged your crimes or circumstances. Forgetting life outside the jail walls happened gradually, then suddenly. Details about your former home became fuzzy around the edges. You struggled to remember the faces of family members who hadn't visited in months. Your old job felt like something that happened to someone else in a different lifetime. The memories that used to comfort you during dark moments started fading like paintings left in direct sunlight too long. Most prisoners reach some form of psychological collapse within 3 to 6 months of incarceration, depending on their previous mental resilience and the specific conditions they endured. The wealthy prisoners who could afford better food and cleaner living conditions lasted longer before breaking. The poor prisoners who faced the full horror of medieval jail life broke faster, sometimes within weeks of their initial arrest. The internal struggle between maintaining hope and accepting permanent imprisonment created constant psychological warfare inside your own head. Part of you still believed in eventual freedom, trial by jury, or intervention by friends who remembered your existence. Another part recognized the futility of hope in a system designed to forget about people like you. These two voices argued constantly, wearing down your mental defenses through their endless debate. Acceptance felt like giving up, but hope felt like torturing yourself with impossible dreams. You bounced between these extremes daily, sometimes hourly, as circumstances changed or your mood shifted. The uncertainty about which voice to listen to created additional stress that accelerated your mental deterioration. Making decisions became impossible when you couldn't trust your own judgment about basic reality. Prisoners developed various coping mechanisms to survive the psychological assault. Prayer worked for some, offering connection to something larger than their immediate circumstances. They spent hours reciting remembered Bible verses or creating new prayers for situations the scriptures never addressed. Others turned to storytelling, either sharing tales with fellow prisoners or creating elaborate fantasy worlds in their minds where they were heroes instead of victims. Some prisoners retreated completely into fantasy worlds that bore no relationship to their actual circumstances. They lived in imaginary castles, ruled kingdoms that existed only in their heads, or maintained complex relationships with people who weren't there. These mental escapes provided temporary relief from unbearable reality, but made it harder to function in actual situations that required clear thinking. The existential crisis hit different prisoners at different times, but it always arrived eventually. You started wondering if you deserved this fate, even when you knew you were innocent of the original charges. The constant suffering made you question everything you believed about justice, fairness, and divine providence. Maybe you were guilty of something else that warranted this punishment. Maybe the system worked correctly, and you just couldn't see your own sins clearly enough. Self-blame became easier than accepting that terrible things happen to good people for no reason at all. Believing you deserved punishment meant the suffering had meaning and purpose. Accepting your innocence meant admitting that life was random and cruel, which felt more terrifying than guilt. Many prisoners chose to see themselves as sinners receiving appropriate correction, rather than victims of an unjust system. The guilt expanded beyond your original crimes to include everything you'd ever done wrong in your entire life. That lie you told your mother when you were 10 years old. The time you cheated a customer by giving them slightly less grain than they paid for. Every moral compromise you'd ever made seemed to justify your current punishment. Your mind created connections between minor sins and major suffering that would have seemed ridiculous in normal circumstances. Mental survival often required accepting a new identity as a prisoner, while secretly nurturing the person you used to be. You learned to act like someone who belonged in jail, while protecting small pieces of your former self in hidden mental compartments. The baker part of you lived in memories of kneading dough and serving customers. The husband part existed in thoughts about your wife's smile and the sound of her laughter. This psychological splitting allowed you to function in prison society while maintaining some connection to your previous life. The prisoner identity handled daily survival tasks like negotiating with guards and avoiding conflicts with dangerous inmates. The hidden identity preserved hopes, dreams, and relationships that might someday matter again if you ever escaped this nightmare. The question that haunted everyone was simple, but impossible to answer. What did it really take to survive this medieval nightmare when your mind fought against you as hard as your circumstances? After months in this stone purgatory, you've learned the most important lesson of all. Survival isn't about strength. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. Your moral compass, which once pointed steadily toward right and wrong, now spins wildly as you face choices that would have horrified your former self. The person who entered this jail with clear principles about honesty, loyalty, and human decency is gone. Someone else lives in their skin now. Someone who understands that good people don't survive medieval imprisonment by staying good. The harsh reality hits you like a mace to the skull. Surviving medieval jail meant compromising everything you once believed about yourself and the world. The system wasn't designed to rehabilitate criminals or protect society. It existed to break people down until they became something else entirely. You thought you could maintain your integrity while enduring whatever punishment they threw at you. You believed your principles would see you through the darkest moments. You were wrong about everything. The moral dilemmas started small and grew larger as desperation took hold of your decision-making process. You watched a fellow prisoner get beaten by guards and did nothing to help, because intervening would have meant sharing his punishment. You stole bread from a weaker inmate who was too sick to defend his food. You lied to guards about escape plans you'd overheard, trading information for slightly better treatment. Each compromise felt necessary for survival, but the cumulative effect transformed you into someone you didn't recognize. Betraying fellow inmates became routine once you realized that loyalty was a luxury you couldn't afford. The merchant who shared his hidden coins with you during your first week got reported to guards when you needed favor to avoid a beating. The woman who taught you how to avoid the worst rats found herself facing extra punishment because you deflected blame onto her for stolen food. Your survival required their suffering, and you chose yourself every time. Bribing corrupt guards felt justified when the alternative was dying from starvation or disease. You traded your wedding ring for clean water during a fever. You gave up your father's knife for protection from violent prisoners. You offered sexual favors to guards in exchange for medicine when infection threatened your life. The medieval justice system's corruption created these impossible choices by design, forcing prisoners to abandon dignity in pursuit of another day alive. Your principles dissolved one moral compromise at a time, until nothing remained of your original ethical framework. Honesty became dangerous when guards punished truthful answers. Kindness became weakness that other prisoners exploited. Compassion became a liability that threatened your own survival. You learned to lie, steal, manipulate, and betray as naturally as breathing, because those skills kept you alive when righteousness would have killed you. The internal conflict between maintaining moral integrity and doing whatever it takes to survive created constant psychological warfare inside your head. Part of you remembered being a good person who helped neighbors and followed religious teachings. Another part recognized that good people died in medieval jails, while bad people adapted and survived. These voices argued constantly until the survival instinct finally won by sheer necessity. The cost of survival extended far beyond your own moral transformation. Relationships you'd built over decades crumbled as you chose self-preservation over loyalty. Friends who trusted you with their lives found themselves betrayed for small advantages. Fellow prisoners who considered you family discovered that family meant nothing when guards offered rewards for information. Every bond you formed became another tool for survival, or another vulnerability to exploit. Your dignity disappeared in pieces until none remained. You begged guards for scraps like a dog. You crawled on hands and knees to reach food that other prisoners threw on the floor. You performed humiliating tasks in exchange for basic necessities. You accepted treatment that reduced you from human being to trained animal, and you thanked your tormentors for the privilege of degradation. The innocence that once protected your soul from the world's cruelty shattered completely under the weight of what you became. You committed acts that would have horrified your former self. You hurt people who trusted you. You participated in the same corruption that landed you in jail originally. The system infected you with its poison until you became part of the disease instead of its victim. The experience changed prisoners permanently, even those who eventually gained freedom through bribes, pardons, or completed sentences. You learned skills that decent people never needed. You developed instincts that served no purpose in civilized society. You carried memories of things you'd done that couldn't be undone or forgiven. The person who walked out of jail bore little resemblance to the person who walked in, except for physical appearance. Freedom itself felt hollow when you realized what you'd sacrificed to achieve it. You had survived, but at the cost of becoming everything you once despised. The victory was empty because the person celebrating it wasn't the person who deserved celebration. You had won against the system by becoming the system. Trading your soul for your life and discovering that the exchange left you with nothing worth preserving. Here's the realization that breaks your spirit more completely than any physical torture. Winning against the system still meant losing fundamental parts of yourself. You could beat medieval justice by adopting its methods, but that victory transformed you into someone who deserved the punishment you'd originally received. The irony cut deeper than any blade they could have used on your body. The true horror of medieval jail wasn't just the physical suffering, though that was considerable. It wasn't the diseases, starvation, or public humiliation, though those broke many prisoners. The real horror was how it forced good people to become someone else entirely in order to survive. The system succeeded not by killing prisoners, but by killing who they used to be and replacing that person with someone who belonged in jail. The medieval authorities understood this psychological transformation perfectly. They didn't need to execute criminals when they could corrupt them instead. Dead martyrs became inspiring stories, but corrupted survivors became living warnings about what happened to people who challenged the established order. You emerged from jail as proof that the system worked exactly as intended, turning decent people into the criminals they were accused of being all along. Medieval prisoners faced an impossible choice that still haunts us today: maintain their humanity and likely die, or sacrifice their souls to survive in an inhuman system designed to corrupt them. The authorities understood this perfectly. They didn't need to execute criminals when they could transform decent people into the monsters they were accused of being. These historical horrors remind us to appreciate our modern protections while recognizing that human cruelty simply finds new forms. The impulse to break people down still exists, wearing different masks, but serving the same purpose. Tonight, as you drift off in your safe bed, let me know in the comments what you think it really takes to survive when the world tries to destroy who you are.